Welcome back to the Great Primeval Show. I am the Ark Minister and I'm joined by Ancient Realms, Hodgepodge, and special guest, Ben. Today we'll be summarising the second Primeval novel, The Lost Island. Written by Paul Kearney and edited by Kath Tretchman at Titan Books Publishing. The blurb for The Lost Island is as follows. A trawler is torn to pieces by an enormous sea monster off the Irish coast. Meanwhile, Connor's anomaly detector goes off the charts. Half a dozen rifts in time have appeared, all on one deserted yet politically contentious island. While Lester struggles to hold on to his career as the story edges closer to the front page, Cutter and the team battle through a deadly storm to reach the island, only to find themselves fighting to survive amidst the terrifying creatures roaming on the harsh landscape. Now, onto the summaries of each chapter.
In the North Atlantic, off the coast of Ireland, the trawler ship known as the Cormorant and its crew are caught out in a storm. The crew notices strange static interference on their radio when they are suddenly struck by a huge unseen entity.
Must have hit a reef!
At the Ark, Connor tampers with the anomaly detector, claiming he can make its readings more precise. Meanwhile, in the North Atlantic, the crew of the Cormorant discuss the nearby Guns Island, the ownership currently being disputed by both Ireland and France. The ship is then attacked by an enormous sea creature, destroying and sinking the ship and killing the crew.
Where's the crew?
All over the place.
Back at the Ark, the team gathers to see Connor's new addition to the detector, a big red button.
Why is there never a big red button?
Off the coast of Ireland, an Irish Coast Guard helicopter retrieves the corpse of one of the Cormorant's crew, appearing to have been bitten in half.
He'd been bitten in half below the waist.
At the Ark, the detector picks up several anomalies all centred around a small island off the southwest coast of Ireland in the Atlantic. Cutter and the team prepare their supplies to head off to the Lost Island. As Jenny plans the trip, she informs Cutter that there are unnaturally powerful storms over the North Atlantic at the moment.
Lester calls in a favour with a government official to get firearms through to Ireland. A Special Forces squad is assigned to the mission, consisting of Captain John Willoughby, Corporal Peter Farnsworth,
Good news, everyone!
Private David Doody, Sergeant Callum Fox, Private John Bristow, and Lance Corporal Anita Watts. Lester informs Jenny of the mission's details, including travelling through Ireland first, and giving permission to let the captain take over the mission if Cutter isn't up to scratch. The team arrives in the town of Cork. Jenny later arrives with their weapons. She informs Cutter that the anomalies on and around the island appear to be frequently closing and reopening. Apparently, the Irish Special Branch wants to investigate the team's suspicious movements, so Jenny stresses that the team has to leave now while she remains behind. They manage to convince the captain of an aged worse-for-wear trawler, the Polar Star, to take them to Guns Island during that very stormy night.
Sure, Charlie, sure, but it's my vessel.
As the ship battles stormy seas and weather, the team plan where best to approach the plateau of the island. The next morning, the sonar picks up a reading of something moving under its own power. Stephen spots an enormous black sea creature heading their way. A Lipleurodon, even larger than the ship, passes by. Despite it taking a few rounds of gunfire, Cutter suggests that it's dying from the cold water.
It's a cold-blooded monster from across the sea.
Later that night, they spot Guns Island, and the team take their equipment and set out from the trawlers in two inflatable dinghies. Stephen and Connor in one, Abby and Cutter in the other, and the special forces divided between them.
It's a Lipleurodon, Charlie. A magical Lipleurodon.
Lipleurodon also appeared in Walking with Dinosaurs in the episode Cruel Sea and in the Jurassic segment of Sea Monsters. It's described as anywhere from 40 to 60 feet long, fitting with its Walking with Dinosaurs appearance. However, this was based on dubious fossil evidence. It is now thought to have been in the range of 20 to 30 feet, but I suppose we could put this up to primeval oversizing creatures. It's said to be black with mottled lighter underside, aka exactly how it looks in Walking With. This is called countershading to help it blend in with its environment to ambush prey. The characters determine it's not a whale by specifically pointing out its lack of a tail fluke. Yet, ironically, studies in the 2010s found that plesiosaurs did in fact have tail flukes. Since no renders of this animal existed for Primeval at the time, the mosasaur from Series 1 Episode 3 is used in place on the Lost Island's cover. Pliosaurs/Liopleurodon actually later appeared in Series 5 Episode 2, and they do not match the Walking With design of this novel, being smaller and all brown in colour. This was likely changed for copyright issues between the BBC and ITV. Due to the enormous size of this Liopleurodon, it is resistant to gunfire, seemingly unfazed by several rounds unloaded into its body by the soldiers. Because the present-day Atlantic Ocean is around 7 to 10 degrees Celsius colder than the seas of the Jurassic, Cutter speculates that the Liopleurodon will shortly die of hypothermia, noting it seemingly acting sluggish already.
Back on mainland Ireland, Jenny is being held in prison by the Irish police, asking her why about the team's mission.
I demand habeas corpus!
In England, Lester is summoned by a high-ranking government official as the mission has caused hell in Ireland. Lester twists the truth by telling him the team's headed to Guns Island to neutralize the British government's biological experiments from the 50s. To avoid the risk of the anomalies going public, Lester suggests informing both the Irish and French governments so that the situation can be cleared. As such, he flies to Ireland to bail out Jenny and informs her that she will be going to the island with the Irish Navy. On their way to the island, Abby and Cutter's dinghy hits a rock and deflates. They and half of their equipment sink into the freezing water and become hypothermic as the others rescue them. The rest of the team removes Cutter and Abby's wet clothes, leaving them in their birthday suits and then wrapping them in a sleeping bag together, to which Connor becomes jealous of Cutter the next morning.
We should huddle together for warmth.
Well, thank you for that image. Once Cutter and Abby are awake and clothed, the team scale the cliff but get caught in a blizzard where Cutter and Abby nearly fall. These two really can't get a break, can they?
Rule number 1 out here, always, no, never go out in a blizzard.
As they reach the top and set up their tents, in the distant darkness, Cutter spots 2 or 3 flickering lights in the night. Anomalies.
Aboard the Irish Navy ship en route to Guns Island, Jenny calls Lester in Brussels, France, who informs her that the French Navy are also on their way to the island. He also reveals that the British Army base was in fact an actual World War II biological research facility, so neutralising any hazards from this is the anomaly cover-up between the Irish and French. Jenny is then transported from the ship to the island by helicopter. However, due to the high winds, they lose control. The same morning, the team discovers a dying young iguanodon, which Cutter mercy kills. They deduce that the anomalies must link to at least 2 different eras, as iguanodon was from the early Cretaceous and Liopleurodon was Jurassic. The team then see the Irish Navy helicopter crash land on the island and head over.
I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we'll be landing immediately. The bad news is we're crash landing.
Inside, Jenny is attacked by a theropod dinosaur, but it is shot and killed by Stephen as the team rescue her, the pilot Sean Bryce, and Irish soldier John McCann. They also take the deceased pilot. Cutter guesses it was an Eotyrannus, and that it's a pack hunter. They take the crew with them back to the camp and take night watch shifts for the predators.
And they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Behind me is an artist's impression of the iguanodon, which we now know stood on its hind legs somewhat in the manner of a kangaroo.
Oh, come on. A kangaroo? Are you sure? Have you ever seen one?
Like most of the creatures in this book, Iguanodon hails from the early Cretaceous Wessex Formation in England, and also appeared in Walking with Dinosaurs in the episode Giant of the Skies. A young dying Iguanodon and, later in the book, an adult herd are encountered, but they're not described in much detail, other than being dark brown with white stripes on their backs, which is strikingly similar to the North American Iguanodon species from Walking with Dinosaurs, even though that creature had been reclassified as its own genus, Dakotodon, by the time of publishing. Apparently, a herd of Iguanodon keep the young in the middle and the adults around the outside.
The next morning, Cutter calls Lester on the sat phone, filling him in on their situation. They plan to head north where the anomalies and old outpost are, and request a helicopter rescue and resupply ASAP. The storm has eased, but the island is now covered in fog. Connor fixes their only handheld detector, but no anomalies are picked up. He speculates that the anomalies may be linked to the storm, and so the lack of it means the anomalies are closed. As the group trek towards the base, they are ambushed in the fog by a pack of Eotyrannus. One kills Farnsworth and another kills Watts, and calls to its pack members.
He's calling for help.
Cutter, Jenny, Willoughby, and the 2 surviving heli crew make it to the base, whilst the others regroup as the fog clears and the storm and anomalies return.
Eotyrannus acts as the main antagonistic creature of the book. It too is described in very little detail, unfortunately. It was an early relative of Tyrannosaurus, and is portrayed as a pack hunter. However, there is no evidence to support this, nor refute it. Similar to the raptors in Series 3 and beyond, it is described as being dark in colour and 20 feet long. The only known specimen of Eotyrannus is 15 feet long, but is a subadult, so likely could have grown larger. So I'd say 20 feet is a reasonable guess for an adult. The novel also describes them as having feather-like quills on their heads, which is similar to the raptors from Jurassic Park 3.
Stephen, Abby, and Connor and the rest of the survivors make it to the base to join the others. Jenny makes a point in saying to the others that they have to keep what they're doing a secret from the Irish government. The detector then picks up an anomaly within the base, and Cutter and Willoughby speculate that the base may have been built to contain an anomaly in the 1950s, meaning that these anomalies are not a recent phenomenon. Cutter attempts to explore the base further, hoping to unravel the mystery of the supposed research on bioweapons. However, he is brusquely countered by Willoughby, deducing he knows something he doesn't.
Cutter and Jenny search an area at the bottom of the base, but are blocked by a door labelled Biocontainment Area locked with a code. After, Cutter assumes Willoughby has been given the code by his superiors and tries to convince him to open it. Later in the night, the Eotyrannus attack the base. Stephen shoots one as it pounces at him. Its dead body falls onto him, heavily injuring his chest. Another Eotyrannus kills Bristow, and the creatures force the team down into the lab, locking themselves in.
That's it then. There's no way out.
Running out of oxygen in the airtight lab, Cutter is proven right as Willoughby is forced to input the code into the lock.
Of course I was right.
Behind the seal, they find an anomaly. With no other method of escape, the team head through into a hot and humid early Cretaceous coastal woodland, spotting a sauropod herd in the distance. Cutter hopes to find another anomaly leading back onto the plateau in the present day.
Lester is aboard a French Navy vessel en route to Guns Island to liaise with the Irish Navy ship and form a maritime exclusion zone. In the Cretaceous, the team set up camp and spot a herd of iguanodon in the distance, which are hunted by neovenators.
Look at all the alligators.
The team decides to move out of their territory later that night.
I think we better move out before they notice us.
On their travels, they encounter iguanodon poo.
Looks gross, but it's not.
A small badger-like mammal scavenging on a newborn iguanodon, some sleeping polacanthus, sunning pterosaurs, and large crocodiles. The group sets up a campfire and eat the tail of the dead baby iguanodon from earlier. Stephen and Cutter have another heart-to-heart about the former's affair with Helen.
Since a lot of creatures in this book are only very briefly seen or described, full creature profiles can't be given. So instead, the other species will all be listed here. Chapter 17 features 8 species alone. A herd of sauropods is only briefly seen by Cutter when he first steps through the anomaly, and are never named or described in detail. Assuming this is indeed the Wessex formation, there are a few genera known, but all from very incomplete remains, meaning that their real-life appearances are fittingly as mysterious as the creatures in this book. Quote-unquote huge dragonflies are said to be around during the expedition in the early Cretaceous. However, this is the only information given. Also, nameless insects are mentioned, which could mean anything, and the Wessex has a fairly diverse entomofauna, so it would make sense. A badger-like mammal appears and snarls at the team. Interestingly, Cutter claims no mammals are known from this place and time. However, the Wessex formation had several mammal genera. The genus Yavalestes was probably somewhat badger-like in appearance, but it was named in 2008 after the novel's setting. The large theropod, Neovenator, is seen hunting a herd of iguanodon in a pack, but like the Eotyrannus, there is no evidence to support or refute this. A sleeping family of Polacanthus are encountered by the team, and others were seen alongside an iguanodon herd, This creature also appeared in Walking with Dinosaurs in the episode Giant of the Skies, and are likewise seen living alongside Iguanodon, as is accurate to its fossil finds.
These animals are again accompanied by a spiky polar canthus.
There's no evidence for them living in groups, but none to refute it either. Interestingly, they are also described as smelling like dung. An unnamed pterosaur is seen flying in the distance. It's described as sail-crested, which fits that of tapijarids. Whilst not named at the time, the genus Whiteear is known from the Wessex Formation. Alternatively, it may represent the genus Corkycephalus, which also had a small head crest and may have appeared in Giant of the Skies as an unnamed pterosaur, as this genus wasn't named until 2005. There are several crocodile-like creatures seen swimming in the shallows along the coast, but little else is said about them. Perhaps they are Bernisartia, or the genus that wasn't named until after this book's release and setting of 2006/07, Antiophthalmosuchus. In a later chapter, there is also a turkey-like dinosaur, seen during the flash flood, caught in an uprooted tree and said to be the size of a turkey and have a tiny head and a long neck, possibly making it a compsognathid such as Aristosuchus or the possible ornithomimosaur Thesosaurus.
Oh my god, I've turned Connor into a turkey.
Back in the present, the French Navy has arrived at Guns Island and performed a sweep of the island by helicopter, not finding any people but spotting anomalies. Lester has a meeting with the French Navy captain who threatens to storm the island, to which Lester states he must accompany the first men there. In the Cretaceous, Stephen's condition worsens, and Duty, he definitely got made fun of in school, is forced to drain his lungs of blood with a syringe to save his life. The team then sends Connor out with the soldiers to search for any nearby anomalies.
Lester is flown to the island along with the French Marines to rescue the team. In the Cretaceous, under the moonlight, Willoughby takes McCann and Connor to search for another anomaly. They detect a weak signal of an anomaly, and Connor assumes it will close soon. McCann foolishly decides to run for it on his own and is killed by a pack of theropods.
Stupid blighter.
The rest of the team quickly set out for the anomaly 5 kilometers away. I guess McCann couldn't survive on his own. Lester and the French Marines reach the bunker and find the bodies of Eotyrannus and Bristow, as well as the anomaly. He deduces the team went through and orders the Marines to guard this anomaly and to do the same with the other anomaly sites spotted from the chopper. In the Cretaceous, the team have to carry Stephen on a makeshift stretcher towards the anomaly. They are caught in a storm, causing a flash flood.
Lester is taken to the site of 3 anomalies. He takes it upon himself to take a rifle from one of the Marines and steps through one of the anomalies. On the other side, the team is ambushed by a pack of small raptors, killing Bryce. At the top of the muddy hill, Lester shouts to them to hurry to the anomaly. As the survivors make it through the anomaly, Willoughby decides to sacrifice himself to continue shooting the dromaeosaurs before they take him down.
Sorry mate, I'm doing this one.
These unnamed dromaeosaurs are described as similar to the raptors encountered in Series 2. However, these are all black in colour and said to be 3 feet tall, implying they are a different species. As for labelling them with a genus, based on the early Cretaceous European geographical setting, they could be Ornithodesmus or Yavalandia. They are also shown to hunt in packs. Once again, there is no evidence for or against this theory. Like the other raptors, they are highly aggressive, preferring to chase moving targets instead of eating the prey they already caught.
Like most modern predators, Matilda can't resist a moving target.
They seemingly hunt based on movement, at least at night time, as they hunted McCann, who was running, but completely missed Connor and Willoughby, who were standing still.
Do you think that maybe his visual acuity is based on movement, like T-Rex, and he'll lose you if you don't move?
As everyone makes it back to the present, the anomalies all close and the storm on the island subsides. Lester asks Cutter for the names of the deceased for the cover-up, but he is still dazed from his experience. After Stephen is seen to by medics, the whole team get into choppers and leave the Lost Island.
Get to the chopper!
Now, onto the breakdowns of each chapter.
Abby is described by Connor as an angry dandelion.
A dandelion?
The floor of the Ark is described as steel-plated even though it's concrete. Connor calls Abby Abs. Meccano and Lego are mentioned. The Lipleurodon attacking the fishing ship is later copied in Jurassic World Dominion.
Lester is described as having a signet ring on his little finger. Again, Oliver Leake does not appear nor is mentioned in this book. Despite him being active during this time, it really seems odd when the whole team gathers around and he's absent. Cutter nearly calls Jenny Claudia, but stops himself. Guns Island in this novel appears to be fictional. However, there is actually a real Guns Island in Northern Ireland. It is just offshore and easily accessed, unlike the fictional island. The anomaly incursion in Peru from the previous book, Shadow of the Jaguar, is briefly mentioned. Connor researches Guns Island on Wikipedia. The real Wikipedia page is for the nearby mainland village Ballyhornan and mentions Guns Island. Guns Island was said to have biological weapons testing, which is similar to the Hound of the Baskervilles. Several films are mentioned, including The Matrix, James Bond, and notably Jurassic Park. Disneyland is also mentioned. Connor accidentally shooting Abby in Series 2, Episode 1 is referenced. Cutter accidentally mentions Jenny's name as Claudia. Interestingly, Cutter decided that dealing with so many anomalies that shoot to kill is a necessary evil, contrasting with his general sentiment / rule of not killing creatures unless absolutely necessary.
Shoot to kill. That makes a refreshing change. I was beginning to feel like a social worker.
Cutter and Stevens seem to be written as if the latter's affair with Helen is still on their mind, even though they set it aside in Series 2, Episode 1. It is revealed that Jenny wears the same perfume as Claudia did. Cutter correctly speculates that a Lipleurodon sank the boat.
The song Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore is mentioned. An error occurs where Cutter thinks of himself as 40-something, when he should only be 33 to 34 at this point. Douglas Henschel himself was in his 40s at the time, and so perhaps the author confused this with his character's age. Action Man is referenced.
Action Man said he's coming.
Apparently, Abby has a pierced midriff. Connor describes Ireland looking just like England. This is ironic because Series 4 and 5 of Primeval were later filmed in Ireland, yet were supposed to be set in England. The real-life locations Shannon Airport and Crosshaven Harbour are mentioned. Connor jokingly calls Abby a stripper. Later on, this joke is made again in Series 3, Episode 9.
Do I look like a stripper?
The whole team have a pint of Irish Guinness at Connor's insistence. Unfortunately, we don't get to see drunk Connor, but Cutter feels a bit tipsy when he considers kissing Jenny. Luke Skywalker and the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars are referenced. John Bull, Captain Birdseye, and the Magical Mystery Tour are mentioned.
Connor gets seasick. Having that pint of Guinness just before probably didn't help. One of the soldiers has a gun called a Mini-Me, and it gets mentioned regularly in the following chapters. It's hard not to imagine Mini-Me from Austin Powers every time the gun is mentioned. Hanlon jokes about the team needing a pair of wings to reach the top of the cliffs. Don't give Stephen ideas. The team tracking creatures on the sonar is very similar to Nigel Marven doing the same in Sea Monsters. Stephen has thoughts about Helen Cutter. There's a line about Stephen and a seagull, quote, so close he could have reached out and slapped it on the arse. Stephen quotes the famous line from the movie Jaws.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Steven Spielberg is mentioned. Connor mentions that he forgot his iPod. Thank God he did. Connor calls Abby Abs again. Connor asking for a gun is part of the Series 2 running gag that Connor isn't allowed to have a gun. Cutter calls himself a zoologist. Also, he thinks about his PhD, which would mean his correct title is technically Dr. Cutter, not Professor Cutter.
Trust me, I'm a doctor. Well, I'm a professor. It's nearly the same thing.
The team said that the trip to Guns Island would take 15 hours.
Jenny apparently attended the University of Oxford. Jenny craves a cigarette. Despite claiming she hasn't smoked one in years, she still had a lighter on her in Series 2, Episode 2. The minister is mentioned. No, not that one. Ironically, while Jenny is bailed out of jail here, she would later bail Connor out of jail in Series 3, Episode 2. The team loses their sat phone in the water. Stephen utters the famous words,
"Bitten off more than it could chew, didn't you, mate?"
This chapter seems to take place over 24 hours. The team arrives at night and doesn't start climbing the plateau walls until dark the next day.
The plateau.
Sean Connery is mentioned.
God's holy trousers.
Jenny incorrectly thinks about knowing how to swim, despite this not being true as seen in Series 2, Episode 4. Jenny knowing how to horse ride and shoot clay pigeons is later mentioned in Series 2, Episode 7.
Most of my friends like Pony Club. I prefer clay pigeons.
Continuing the Series 2 Connor gun gag, at one point Connor steals a pistol from one of the sleeping soldiers and is quite proud of himself. The injured iguanodon is similar to the iguanodont Nigel encounters in Land of Giants from Chased by Dinosaurs. Luckily, Nigel wasn't as ruthless as Cutter.
And luckily, they can recover from injuries that would kill a mammal. And hopefully, she's going to be alright.
During the helicopter crash, Jenny cracks 2 ribs. This is one of the most severe, non-lethal injuries any of the team has received. Jenny states all James Lester gives a damn about is his ascent of a very greasy pole. Steady on, Jenny.
Cutter calls Lester a bastard. This novel is confirmed to be set in winter, so takes place sometime between December 2006 and February 2007. Apparently, 1/5 of the world's gannet population nest on the fictional Guns Island during the summer.
Well, I don't like them. They wet their nests.
The RSPB is mentioned. The fog scene is very similar to the long grass scene from the Lost World Jurassic Park.
Don't go into the long grass!
The text drops a primeval title bomb. Connor calls Abby Abs, yet again. Whichever creature makes the quote-unquote shadow as big as a friggin' house was most likely an Eotyrannus, or possibly an adult iguanodon, or an early Cretaceous sauropod. Stephen asks Cutter for a hug after reuniting, but Cutter says he's too ugly.
Bit harsh.
Pretty sure this is meant to be read as banter, but could come off really mean. At one point, a cold Connor says, "I wouldn't mind a few hours in the Cretaceous. Be careful what you wish for."
We've been here a year, Connor. A year.
The research base is said to be bomb-proof and have at least 3 distinct levels: admin, living, and labs. James Bond is referenced again. The London Underground anomaly from Series 1 Episode 2 is referenced. Tutankhamun's tomb is mentioned. Entering Moria from The Lord of the Rings is also referenced.
And they call it a mine. A mine!
Lightsabers from Star Wars are also referenced.
Colditz is mentioned. Connor calls Abby Abs another time. Abby accidentally frightening Stephen is very reminiscent of this scene. Stephen calls the anomalies gateways, similar to how Emily and Ethan and the Time Tribe do in Series 4. Eisenhower is mentioned. The anomaly within the base was seemingly studied by a group of people in the 1950s before it disappeared. This is similar to Series 3, Episode 6, where Professor John Morton and his team discovered an anomaly in the 1930s and studied it. Cutter notes the room/catwalk was reminiscent of the Ark. Jenny warning Cutter about going through the anomaly is quite similar to when she says
"Don't go"
to him in Series 3, Episode 3, and Claudia Brown saying the same in Series 1, Episode 6.
Don't go.
Cutter theorises that the anomalies opening here have something to do with the geology and meteorology of the island. This is never expanded on. Big sad.
John Le Carre and Ian Fleming are mentioned. This marks the first time both Connor and Abby have been through an anomaly, and I don't think it's going to be the last. Stephen suggests they could settle the debate on whether dinosaurs were warm or cold-blooded, despite having dealt with raptors in Series 2, Episode 1. Cutter mentions not knowing much about the behavior of dinosaurs, or even if any were nocturnal. Isn't he an evolutionary zoologist? Cutter mentions the KT event, now known as the KPG event, that will be a main focus in the next novel, Extinction Event. The song Always Look on the Bright Side of Life from Monty Python is referenced. Connor wonders what it would be like to be able to control anomalies. This is similar to the anomaly opening device Helen later uses in Series 3. Interestingly, he previously thought about this in the last novel. Cutter wonders if Helen intended for the timeline to change when they went to the Permian together. Iguanodon and Polacanthus feed together like in Walking with Dinosaurs, Giant of the Skies. An error occurs when Stephen describes his affair with Helen as happening recently when it actually happened 8 years ago. Lester has a conversation with the French military. It is written in English, however they are all speaking French. It's specified that the Irish helicopter was a Scout, whereas the French are using a Puma helicopter hence why the former crashed and the latter can fly in the high winds. Despite what we said earlier about Jenny having the most severe injury, Stephen has now topped it with not only broken ribs, but also a pierced lung filling up with his blood, slowly drowning him, definitely making Stephen the winner of the most severe non-lethal injury. Not only that, the method of draining his lungs is even more severe. Ugh. Stephen talks about how if he was to die, that his fossilized bones would confuse paleontologists, who would discover him alongside dinosaur remains. This isn't too dissimilar to how Helen's body would end up in the Pliocene in Series 3, Episode 10, or Captain Ryan's body in the Permian in Series 1, Episodes 6 and 1. And Connor is finally given a gun.
Lester apparently plays squash on the weekends. What an image. When the French military and Lester find the crashed Irish helicopter, there is no corpse of the Eotyrannus shot by Stephen earlier. This is either a goof, or more likely other predators dragged the body away. Lester literally does this when he sees a footprint, likely belonging to the Eotyrannus, to hide the evidence. Connor and Cutter recall the raptors from Series 2, Episode 1, and describe them as a mated pair, despite the male eating the baby.
They eat their own young.
Connor throws away a handheld detector and says, "I'll build a better one," which may imply that in this story and Shadow of the Jaguar, the team was still using the prototype handhelds from Series 2, Episode 3, and the better ones Connor speaks of are the improved handhelds first seen from Episode 4 onwards. Cutter apparently went on a dig in Kenya, and possibly encountered a flash flood there as well.
Lester receives a call from a voice, wanting an update on the situation. From the context, it appears to be Sir David Brooke, CMG, from earlier in the story, or it could possibly be the Minister. It's unclear. This is also Lester's first time through an anomaly.
Isn't nature wonderful?
There's almost a conclusion to the Connor gun gag, where Connor uses a knife to defeat a dromaeosaur instead of a gun. Cutter even points out this fact in the next chapter. It is implied that Lester, and by extension the British government, knows why the bunker was built in the 1950s, but he refuses to elaborate, claiming it's best not known for the good of Great Britain. This brings up more questions than answers. Did the British government know about the anomaly since the 50s? Were there other experiments other than the anomaly? Unfortunately, these questions are never answered. Lester ends the story with a James Bond quote, "I could tell you that, but then I'd have to kill you."
In closing, The Lost Island takes place over 9 days, and there is a short amount of time between this novel and Series 2, Episode 4. Now that we've all finished the second official Primeval novel, what do we all think?
What a breath of fresh air. This is so much better than the previous book, and I think at least 2 others present in this video can agree with that statement. What I love about The Lost Island is that the characters all feel like themselves. They all make interesting arguments about things and have playful banter and jokes, which you can imagine the cast acting out if this was an episode of the show. The scenes particularly in the bunker when the Eotyrannus are trying to break in, the whole mystery of the bioweapons and the anomaly's purpose, and the excursion into the early Cretaceous make for some great compelling reading. I think the first half of the book, where the team are actually getting to the island, is a bit slow, but once it gets going, it's very well done. I'd give this an 8 out of 10.
The Lost Island was so much better than the last book, in my opinion. The characters feel much more like themselves. Whilst this book is a bit slow to start, once it gets going, it is such a good story. The scene in the fog is a definite highlight for me, with the team being picked off one by unseen predators. The Cretaceous coastal woodland was wonderfully fleshed out with interesting creatures that I feel an episode would have struggled to accomplish to a similar degree due to production constraints and having to animate so many creatures. I wish the Liopleurodon was also a Cretaceous pliosaur instead, so they were all from the same time period. But it's not a big deal. Overall, a wonderful Primeval story.
Of the 4 Primeval novels, I've read 2. This and Fire and Water. This was the second time I read this novel. The first being 14 years ago. What do you mean 14 years? I really like this book, even more so on the second read-through. The author knows these characters very well, and it shows in his writing. I felt like I was reading a very long episode of the show. It was really interesting to also see Lester doing the bureaucratic stuff that's only alluded to in the show. Since it's a novel, they don't have to worry about shooting schedules. The soldiers were a welcome addition to the team and gave the story a kind of Aliens feel, though Hudson was very missed.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
I think the author was also a fan of Walking with Dinosaurs, because most of the creatures that appear in this novel also appear in the show, and the way they're described also fits the descriptions of how they appear in the documentary. As for gripes, I don't have a ton. Since there's a ton of characters, it's kind of hard to keep track of who's who. The story also takes a bit to get going, and it was a bit frustrating to have the first few chapters jump back and forth from the ARC team to the ship stuff. I also think McCann's betrayal kinda came out of left field because it wasn't hinted at all. It was never shown that he had any animosity towards the Brits. The book also ends pretty quick. There isn't a chance to breathe, and the reactions to Willoughby dying felt a bit rushed, which stinks considering we spent the entire book with him. The lab also seemed a little impractical. Wouldn't the anomaly have gone away by the time they finished building it? There's also not a clear resolution to it, unless it's brought up an extinction event, which I haven't read yet. With all of that being said, these are very minor gripes in an otherwise great book. Now I gotta go read the other two. If I were to rate it, I'd probably give Primeval the Lost Island an 8.5 out of 10. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the Arc Minister, Ancient Realms, and Hodgepodge for letting me help them with this review. I had a lot of fun.
If I had one word to describe The Lost Island, it would be undercooked. Firstly, all the characters actually feel like the characters, thankfully, and the story premise is really interesting. The pacing and content, though, leaves a lot to be desired. It takes 10 chapters for the team just to get onto the plateau, but then Lester and the French travel there with little issue. Then, instead of exploring the island full of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures, the team get locked in a bunker and travel to the Cretaceous instead. And all the loose creatures just apparently die from exposure. Kinda makes the team's mission to neutralise all the creatures on the island moot. Also, the story ends with no cleanup. Overall, despite sounding harsh, The Lost Island is an enjoyable read, but leaves you wanting more, but not in a good kind of way. Kinda like going to a fancy restaurant, paying for an expensive meal and only getting a tiny portion on the plate. All the ingredients are there, but it's still raw. Hence my review word of undercooked. I give this a rating of 7 out of 10. Thank you, Ben, for joining us for this summary. Join us next time for our breakdown of Primeval Series 2, Episode 4.
And now it's only a matter of time before this lost world is found and pillaged.